Hey, this is Pat Murphy-Racy. I wanted to do a video on the different lens mounts of Sony because it can be very, very confusing to figure out exactly the difference between NEX and E-mount and A-mount, and they're all called alpha somehow. Bizarre. So I wanted to kind of explain all that. And to do that best, I think you got to use history to explain it. So at a certain point, back in 2010, Sony came out with an NEX 3. It was a little tiny compact camera that took interchangeable lenses, but what was so unique and different about this camera is that it used an APS-C sensor. So it was this massive sensor stuffed into this little tiny body. And if you haven't figured out, that's kind of the tradition of Sony mirrorless cameras. So the NEX 3 was the first of these with this NEX mount. Now simultaneously, on the video side, Sony came out in 2010 with a camera called the VG10, which was in its own right a really remarkable camera because it also used an APS-C sensor and it also had interchangeable lenses, but it was a video camera with no clip limit, etc. And these two cameras were pretty groundbreaking, but even in the business and the industry, they weren't really noticed because Sony wasn't really noticed for doing interchangeable lens cameras at all at that time. Now, my own interest in mirrorless with Sony didn't happen until 2012 and really into 2013. And my first entrance into the NEX mount lenses was the venerable A3000. Now, Sony looks at this camera and they think, "Oh God, we don't, I can't believe we made that." But really, it was a fantastic camera. I still use these sometimes for remotes in basketball because you can buy them for about $150 on eBay used, and if they get hit, who cares? And also, when the A3000 came out, there was something different about it. And up here on the top of the lens flange, it actually says E-mount, not NEX, but E-mount. And so that was a really unique thing. So at a certain point, Sony called these APS-C crop sensor lens, that whole lens system was called NEX. And if you look at the, like for instance, this is the NEX 24mm Zeiss 1.8, killer lens, love this lens. But this actually was, rebranded as E-mount, but this lens was available to be purchased for the NEX 5 and the NEX 3. And later the A6000, which replaced the A3000. Are you confused yet? But here's the deal. Ultimately, at the end of the day, NEX is the same exact thing as E-mount. The only difference is that some of the lenses that Sony make, and Sigma for that matter, are designed for full frame, and those are designated as FE lenses in E-mount. And then the other ones are just either labeled as NEX or E-mount. So, but the good news is, unlike with Canon, like here's an A9 with an 85-1.4 G master on it. This is a full frame camera with a full frame lens. If you are a Canon shooter and you have a crop sensor lens, which they called EFS, you can't even mount that lens onto a full frame camera. It physically won't attach. And with Sony, you can do back and forth, no problem. So as an example, I can take this G Master 85 off of the full frame camera, and I can put it onto my A6000. And when I do that, this now has a field of view of a 135mm 1.4, which is sweet. It's a really nice way to work. I shot basketball with this at WPPI a year ago when this lens came out. It's amazing. So this works great. Now, what a lot of people don't realize is that the opposite is also true. So I can take this crop sensor APS-C lens, this 24 1.8, which I love, and I can attach this to the A9, and I have now a very lightweight street shooting camera with a 35mm field of view, because that's how it translates from APS-C into full frame. I do lose some resolution, so my 24 megapixel now became a 10 megapixel, I believe. But for a lot of assignments, that's overkill. So This is a really nice way to work, and when I go on vacation, I will often take this, I'll take my A9 with an APS-C lens on it, and it's super lightweight, and it's great. So this gives me more speed than the 35-2.8 FE lens, but not the weight and the bulk of the 35-1.4, which I'm shooting this video with, by the way. So bottom line is, everything that is E-mount is interchangeable. And that's really good news. And I could stop there, but I want to kind of tell you about something else that is also possible. Remember I mentioned the VG10 camera, which was a video camera made by Sony in 2010. Now, it was a remarkable camera in its day, some 8 years ago. It put an APS-C sensor into a tiny, lightweight, small package. Amazing for POV work and video. Now, they now make a series of cameras, the FS5 and the FS7. They're all the way up to the FS7 II at this point. And they make some specific lenses for those. They're more branded as cinema lenses. And I have one of those here. So this is a 28-135. And the cool thing is, this is an APS-C size sensor optic. There are actually two kind of professional high-end cinema lenses at this time in Sony that are all both E-mount. There's this one, the 28-135, which I already showed you. There's also this one, which came out last year. This is the 18-110 G lens. And this is great because it's like a really true wide angle. It's got this really cool shade. Look at this thing, man. I just love that. But anyway, you know, when you're looking at what lenses are available in Sony, it's important not to forget the cinema glass. So there's a lot of things different about cinema glass from just regular still photography glass. And the first thing is focus breathing. These lenses don't breathe as much as like a typical lens that's made for a still camera. What does that mean? And many times in a motion picture or a TV show, you have what's called a two-shot, and you'll have two people talking, and the camera will be moving focus from one to the other, and they're very close together. In a typical still camera lens, when you make that move and one person goes out of focus, that person gets larger. They magnify. And so non-breathing lenses don't magnify as they get knocked in and out of focus. And so the image stays the same, like the person's head, for instance, will stay about the same size. And so these are very, very nice lenses. These lenses are actually really great at what we call run and gun. If you're walking and you're kind of shooting as you're walking, and it's very much a live capture event, like a wedding or news, these lenses are great. There's a couple of other attributes about them that I think are useful to say about them. One, they're instantly, you can knock them in and out of manual and autofocus very quickly. So autofocus is forward, so the camera's taking care of focus for you. You just knock this ring back, and now you're actually focusing the ring yourself. You'll also notice that all of the controls are on the side of the lens instead of the top, because in a video camera you're often working up high on a tripod and you're able to see everything you need to see from the side. And so that's how you can always tell a cinema lens different. These lenses also have what's called a servo or a power zoom built in. So you can actually be zooming with your thumb wide to telephoto back and forth. And you can creep these lenses really well. You can kind of go real slowly. If you're going to try and do a slow zoom, you can creep with them. These are great to work on sliders. And believe it or not, they're incredibly sharp lenses in their own right on the still photography side of things. I've used the 28-135 a couple of times when I was doing a whole series of like 100 portraits of an entire school or whatever. And it's a very good lens, very sharp. And I like the fact that it's a short lens that you can mount on a monopod very easily. So these can be used not just for cinema work and video, but you can also use them in still photography as well. So I just wanted to kind of point these out because people always forget these lenses when they talk about E-mount, NEX, and A-mount. One last thing I wanted to kind of address, and that is that the alpha system, as it's known, comprises NEX, E-mount and A-mount glass. And all of that glass is interchangeable throughout all the entire system of all the E-mount cameras. And you don't want to forget the FS7 and the FS5 when you talk about that. So right here we have an FS7 and mounted without any adapter, directly mounted to the FS7 is the G Master 100-400 zoom. Now I just used this to make a video in Nashville last week. It was phenomenal. The autofocus is silky smooth. I really enjoyed using it. It was great. So don't think only in terms of still camera compatibility, but for many, like especially at a university where you have like a photo services department where you got still photographers and working with student photographers, and then you got video people. What's so convenient about the E-mount system as a whole is that you can have Sony high-end video cameras, you can have middle-grade video cameras, you can have still cameras that are low cost, inexpensive, and then super high-end like the A9, A7R3, and you can use one pool of lenses for the entire system. When I shot Canon, I had Panasonic video cameras, and nothing really went back and forth. They were completely separate systems. And so the synergy of the entire Sony Alpha lineup is really powerful, but I think people kind of forget that on a pretty regular basis. I hope you've enjoyed watching this video. I hope it's been informative, and I hope it explained the difference between A-mount lenses, NEX lenses, and E-mount lenses. And as I like to say, if you found something of value in what you saw in the video and you're interested in buying something, please visit alphauniverse.com/dealer locator to find your local photo specialty retailer. You want to really keep these guys in business because they're to answer your questions and help you make decisions about gear purchases now and in the future. Thanks so much for watching. I'm Sony artisan Patrick Murphy-Racy.